Continuing to be in complete command of the Seahawks' new offense, Geno Smith put on an aerial assault on day 3 of Seahawks training camp. We'll be diving into Smith's performance and much more here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're in Syracuse, Indiana, or Montpelier, Vermont. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are now 3 days into Seahawks training camp, and after the defense got after it a little bit yesterday, Geno Smith and company letting it rip. An aerial assault today in Seattle's third training camp practice. We're going to take a deep dive into Smith's performance and a few standout performances from the receiving core as well. And we'll look at some defensive takeaways from today's practice. And then we'll cap things off. Jack Westover, the undrafted rookie tight end out of Washington, reuniting with Ryan Grubb in Seattle. How's that process going? How does he feel about being a close confidant for Geno Smith as the quarterback tries to learn a new offense? We're going to dive into that with a exclusive interview from training camp, and that'll be coming up later in the show. Let's get to our lead story here now on Locked On Seahawks. And there's been a lot of debate this offseason. Connor, we've talked about it quite a bit on this podcast on several episodes with the value of Geno Smith and where he fits into Seattle's quarterback plans, not just this year, but beyond 2024. And he seems to have that chip still on his shoulder that he wants to prove to people that, hey, I'm not just a one-year wonder or two-year wonder. I still can be the starting quarterback for the Seahawks team. Long-term, I could be that quarterback for the next 4 or 5 years. He is slinging the pigskin as well as we have seen him. He is in great command of the offense. Last week that he said before going to training camp that he thinks that he is still an ascending player, that he is getting better. He's faster. He's stronger. And it shows on the field. We can see the results. Even if this offense is still being installed and they have a long ways to go, you're getting an enticing taste of what this unit may be able to do. We know the offensive line is still the big X factor here for all this to come together, but you're getting an enticing taste of what this passing game could do to opponents this year with number 7 under center.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I'm noticing is he just sounds – Geno Smith has never had an issue with confidence. Let's get that out there first. But he sounds more confident than he ever has in these press conferences and leading up to this season. He keeps talking about, I'm about to be 34 years old, but I feel better than I ever have. And, most players, when they say that, I wouldn't believe them. But with Geno Smith, something about the way he presents it, and he's obviously showing it on the field – I believe him when he's saying these things. And I think it's exactly what fans want to see and they want to hear from their starting quarterback. If he goes out there this year and continues to ball out and has a much better year than he did last year, I know you've talked about it, Corbin, just in terms of this could be Geno Smith's career year. If he does that, Seattle's going to be in a really tough spot after this season and wondering if they're going to extend him or what they're going to do at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, and I can tell you this right now, it's only been 3 days, so it's way too early to make a judgment on what Sam Howell is going to be able to do in Seattle. But it has been a rough start to training camp for him. And so there really is a widening gap between those first 2 quarterbacks on Seattle's depth chart. Anybody that thought there was going to be a competition, they snuffed that out before it ever even started, saying that Geno was the undisputed starter. But still, there were still some fans out there believing, Sam Howell could make this very interesting. To this point, the more interesting thing is Sam Howell going to be able to fend off P.J. Walker? Because Walker has been the better quarterback in these first 3 days, and he's getting more opportunities. Today had more snaps than what he's had in the first 2 practices. He is still the number 3 guy. I don't think the Seahawks are going to be that quickly making the decision that Sam Howell can't be the backup, but that is something to keep a close eye on. But with those 2 getting limited reps, Geno Smith still being the one that is running the first team offense, what we saw today, the deep ball has been a big part of Geno Smith's ascendance the last couple of years, or it's resurrection, may be the right word, resurrecting his career. Has been one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL, and today had a 60-yard bomb to DK Metcalf, who got inside separation against Trey Brown and then beat him by a few steps, wide open, gift wrapped the touchdown. Geno Smith drops it right in the bucket, 6 points. A couple plays later, Jackson Smith-Njigba comes open on a slot fade and goes 50 yards for the score. So you got to see some of those big play theatrics. And the other thing that's exciting is Geno has been much better in the red zone in these first 3 days than what we saw last year. And that obviously translated to the regular season. The Seahawks were one of the worst red zone teams in the NFL, but he has been getting after it, throwing the football in the red zone, had 3 touchdown passes in their 2 series in the red zone. Today had a diving touchdown catch by Tyler Lockett that I will admit, from my angle, I'm not sure that he caught it, but you don't have instant replay in training camp. So it's going to count as a touchdown. And then the other 2, DK Metcalf again on a quick out route, beating rookie Nehemiah Pritchett. Ball right on the money from Geno Smith. Perfect timing, 6 points. And then Noah Fant slipping out in the flats. Second day in a row, he has scored a touchdown like this. Just a quick dump off, easy, 6 points. And it leaves you wondering, why was this not something the Seahawks did more with Noah Fant the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's just starting with the Noah Fant side of things. I mean, that's something that was just completely underutilized last year, is Noah Fant in the red zone. It should have been done way more often. It's encouraging that we're seeing it early in training camp, because that means that they're probably going to emphasize it as we get closer to the preseason and regular season. I do want to go back to the Sam Howell point for a second, Corbin, just because if Howell is not, this is when we want to see Howell playing well, especially if he's going to be the eventual possible successor to Geno Smith. Not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that for the people who believe that could be the case, we want to see a little more out of Sam Howell just in training camp before pads have even come on. But he also still is going to stay in that second spot on the depth chart for now. It's not like one bad day is going to push him out there, and everybody has bad days. Yeah. So it's going to be something to watch going forward, but we hope to see a little bit more out of him for sure. Now, in terms of the red zone offense in general, that's somewhere that Seattle was just horrendous. And I think it relates right back to third downs. Just anytime you're in a gotta-have-it situation, last year Seattle's offense struggled, whether that was the red zone, whether that was in third downs. They were 23rd in third down conversion last year. Those small elements of a football game offensively have to be better for this team this year. And like you said, it's early. We can't make any conclusions about what's going on in training camp now, but to see that looking good with Geno Smith and the whole first team offense, that's a very encouraging point.
Yeah, I'm encouraged by the fact that we're seeing this consistently happen here these first 3 days. And again, we have to get the pads on. That is totally going to change things. If they're still playing well in the red zone when the pads come on, then that is certainly a positive development for this football team. And we'll see what happens with the other 2 quarterbacks here. Now, Sam Howell, we do have to remember that he is still acclimating to this new offense. And I think he looks quite uncomfortable right now. And that could be something where a switch comes on in one of these practices where he starts to play like we think he's capable of. But at this point, he's been really erratic. He's throwing the football over the place. He overthrew 3 passes in the red zone period that the receivers were wide open, and he just has not been able to get the football to him. And I don't know if it's nerves, if it's just the lack of comfort, but he has just not been throwing with the accuracy that I expected to see from him in this training camp. And PJ Walker had maybe the best throw of the entire day. He threw an absolute missile to Brady Russell on a 30-yard post route and hit him right on the hands in stride and showed more velocity than I expected to see from PJ Walker. So again, it was one practice, but I do think that that is something to keep a close eye on there, just from the fact that PJ Walker has started a lot of games in the NFL. Has not had overly great success from a statistical standpoint, but he's won some games. He helped the Browns beat the 49ers last year in the middle of the season. So you're talking about a guy that has started games. He's got dual threat capabilities. So if Sam Howell is not able to start riding the ship a little bit, then who knows what ends up happening on that front. I would expect it would take an absolute collapse for the Seahawks to move PJ Walker to the number 2 spot, but he does have experience and is one of the better number 3 quarterbacks that you're going to find in the NFL. So it just creates another storyline. But I think the main storyline here is we knew there wasn't a competition, but the gap between Geno Smith and the other 2 quarterbacks in this roster, I think it's a much wider gap than most people anticipated going into training camp. And he is just flat out slinging the pigskin. It looks fantastic to start training camp. When we come back, we are going to ship over to the defensive side of the football, and we're going to discuss what we saw today at training camp, including a player that kind of had become a forgotten commodity on the defensive line starting to stand out and might be a bigger piece of the puzzle than people anticipated. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, windshield wiper fluids, whatever you need, whether it's speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to be burning rubber, not cash. Well, the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's Blue Friday episode by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. As always, thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Seahawks with their 3rd training camp practice now officially in the books. We just discussed really the star of the show, Geno Smith, a couple long touchdown passes in team drills, also had 3 touchdowns in the red zone period, no turnovers, really was on the money today with that first team offense. But we also got a chance to see some things that jumped out on defense. And I actually want to start this conversation with a player who I actually had a chance to speak with today, and we may have clips from that interview that'll be coming on a future episode of Locked On Seahawks next week. But Trey Brown, he's been working with the first team defense, Connor, at the left cornerback position, and he's entering a contract year. So everything's at stake for Trey Brown right now playing in this defense. And he was on the wrong side of that DK Metcalf touchdown, that 60-yarder. He was the corner that got burned, but it's worth noting that he got his revenge in the red zone period. He had 2 back-to-back really nice coverage plays against DK Metcalf on goal line fades. One of them, the coverage was so tight, the ball ended up sailing over Metcalf. The other one, he got his hand on the football and knocked it away. And maybe that's been the most fun battle to watch one-on-one so far to this point, even without pads on. It got a little bit chippy and a little chirpy between those 2 guys. And you got to love the intense competitors, but Trey Brown out there really has mostly, aside from that touchdown today, he's been off to a good start for this training camp and looks like he's got a pretty steady hold right now on that 3rd cornerback job for the Seahawks.
Yeah, Mike Jackson enjoyers are not going to enjoy hearing that, like myself. But at the same time, I love Trey Brown. He's a great cover corner. He makes big plays, and that's something that Seattle's defense needs. I think that anytime it's iron sharpens iron in this situation. Trey Brown, if he's getting burned by DK Metcalf, you know he's going to come right back and try and put DK Metcalf on the flip side of that result. So to hear him having that good of a day at training camp this early, obviously, as we're going to say a million times over these next few weeks, the pads, are going to make a big difference right now early on. With no pads, there's not much contact happening, but there's enough to where you can see positioning and everything else and where players are being in the right spots. So for Trey Brown to kind of come back right there and be able to do that, it's a huge plus for his sort of his role in this offense, and what the competition between him and Mike Jackson particularly might start leaning in his direction a little bit.
And when you look at the defensive line, Trey Brown has already been on the radar. We've been talking about the fact that he's been with that first team defense. He's been playing left cornerback. He made a lot of plays in OTAs and minicamp. We got to see him start 7 games last year. He had 2 interceptions. He had a pick 6 in that win over the Lions in week 2. Played really well against the Bengals in a loss in Cincinnati. I mean, we've already gotten some glimpses of what Trey Brown can be. There just hasn't been the consistency there. But on the defensive line, with Byron Murphy II coming to town, Leonard Williams re-signing after being acquired at the trade deadline last year, Mike Morris missed almost the entirety of his rookie season. And we didn't really get a chance to see what he's capable of doing. I thought he had an excellent training camp. This is a guy that, as a 5th-round pick, I think was very much in the running to get significant snaps on Seattle's defensive line as a rookie. And then his shoulder, an injury that had been bothering him since college, continued to bother him, had surgery, missed the last 16 games of the regular season, comes back, and he is still one of those guys. And there's just certain players like this that just stand out like a sore thumb. And compared to all the other massive human beings that are on that defensive line, you've got this 6'6", 300-pound guy. And he's been standing out beyond just the fact that he is a different body type than anybody else on this defensive line. He had a really good day today. He's been a player that I have noticed these first 3 days. He's been very active. He does such a good job of making himself lean in order to get into gaps and create penetration. He collapsed the pocket a couple times today. One of them, he got his 34-inch arms up, knocked down a Geno Smith pass. He has just consistently been a player that's been popping off the field, not just because he is a different body type and just looks like he would be a problem, but this is a guy that has played 3-tech. He's played big end. He's played for Mike McDonald previously at Michigan. And it feels like this was kind of a forgotten player, an afterthought with the moves there. If you're going to get production from him with all the other pieces that you already have on this defensive line, it just makes the ceiling that much higher for Mike McDonald up front.
Yeah, and you wonder how much just having Mike McDonald in the building as Seattle's head coach now just kind of rejuvenated him a little bit, gave him a little extra bounce in his step, just because he does have some familiarity with what Mike does, a fair bit of familiarity, obviously, from their time at Michigan together. So, and you're right, he is a physical specimen. He's one of those guys that you can really put anywhere on the defensive line, and that's just becoming the identity of this group. There's so much versatility. I mean, now we have obviously Draymond Jones, who's getting a lot of reps on the edge and could be sliding out there a whole lot more. We have Jaron Reed constantly talking about how everybody on this defensive line is being put at every position, essentially. And Mike Morris seems like one of those guys that could earn his spot on this team purely because of his versatility. And he did play a lot of edge in college. So who knows? Maybe he ends up out there, and that spells a little more doom for particularly Darrell Taylor, who is kind of a one-trick pony so far in his career. Mike Morris could be coming for those reps. So it's just becoming a theme with this defensive line. And I think that the more we see of this defense in general, the more we're kind of seeing how this personnel is perfect for what Mike McDonald wants to do going forward.
And I want to close out this segment. We can talk about certain players like Tyrese Knight got his chance to play with the ones today, and I thought there were some nice plays getting up and at least being in position. He's not going to be tackling anybody right now. There's no pads, but he was getting himself in position. He was playing his gaps right. Got to see some things like that. But this is the time of year where you're trying to protect your players a little bit because attrition starts to settle in. It only takes a few training camp practices. This is the NFL. Guys start to get a little beat up, and you want to try to protect players. Jerome Baker coming off that wrist injury, also had a lower body injury that caused him to miss the entire offseason. They gave him a veteran rest day. Same thing with George Fant today. They're going to be careful with his snap count. And might as well keep him bubble wrap with Abe Lucas's situation right now. Make sure that George Fant is ready to go. And the reason that this approach has to be taken, we saw it, and this can happen with anybody today, Draymond Jones having his leg banged by a teammate on a play, and he reached back for his hamstring. He was able to get over to the sideline. Didn't look like he was hobbled necessarily, but he was reaching for that hamstring, did not practice the rest of the practice. He left the field with an ice wrap on his leg. From my understanding, there's not a significant injury here, not something to be overly concerned about. But anytime that you have a starter caliber player like Draymond Jones exiting the field with ice on his leg, I do think it is worthwhile to note that moving towards the weekend.
Yeah, you never like to see it, especially with a guy who we want to see a lot more out of this season after having an okay year last year. I feel like his role was not super tailored to his skill set, and so I think we might see a much better situation for Draymond Jones this year. But hopefully, it doesn't hold him out too long. Obviously, they have an off day on Sunday, so hopefully he's just going to sit out. Obviously, the rest of practice today, and then he'll probably get the day off tomorrow and come back after the off day on Sunday. So again, hopefully it's not too serious. Hopefully it's a quick recovery, whatever it is, something minor. But yeah, we're expecting a lot out of Draymond Jones this year, and so hopefully he gets healthy quick.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a key player for that front line. All the pieces we've already mentioned, but he's a guy that can move up and down the line. He's going to play some off the edge. I think he's looked pretty good these first couple of days as well. So you want to make sure that he is healthy. So if he's got to sit out a Saturday practice, go for it. You get Sunday off, give him a few days. Again, didn't look overly serious. The fact he was able to get to the sideline without looking hobbled or anything, maybe just had a light tweak. That's what you're hoping for, but that is certainly going to be something to at least keep an eye on until he gets back on the field and we see how he looks. But I would think, as you mentioned, I think Monday is probably the best bet as far as when we could see him at the earliest. And heck, they might give him another day off. We don't know where things stand on that front, and they're going to want to make sure that he's healthy before they put him back on the field. Week one is more important than missing one or two of these training camp practices for a player like that. That's going to be integral to what the Seahawks are going to be doing on the defensive side of the football. When we come back for the last segment here today on our Blue Friday episode, going to be joined by Jack Westover, the undrafted rookie tight end out of Washington, as he dives into his early experiences in the NFL playing for the hometown team and his journey overall, going from Mount Si High School to Washington and now to the Seattle Seahawks. We'll get to that interview that'll be coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. When I was a site manager, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates. They made the process so easy and seamless. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates available, and so easy, in fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive. It's quick. It's easy. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined on today's show by my co-host, Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks hosting their third training camp practice, their second open to fans today at the VMAC. We got to see Geno Smith put on a bit of a show. And leading up to this point, it's a Seattle Seahawks training camp, Connor. We know that there are going to be undrafted rookies that are going to offer intrigue, and there certainly are several guys that could check out that box for this year's class. But I don't know that anybody offers more intrigue than tight end Jack Westover, coming from Washington. Obviously, a lot of Husky fans loved what they saw from him in this offense the last couple of years, coordinated by none other than Ryan Grubb, who now is the Seahawks offensive coordinator, bringing Jack Westover to the Seahawks with him as an undrafted rookie. And we've gotten to see some glimpses of his soft hands throughout the offseason program early here in training camp, and very much a player to keep a close eye on in this new look tight end group as he tries to crash the party and make this roster. Certainly he has a major feather in his cap with that experience in Ryan Grubb's offense.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it today, and Nick Bellore not with Seattle anymore. And that seems like that just seems like a perfect role for Jack Westover to potentially take over, sort of an H-back / tight end role. And I'm just really excited to see how he fits into this offense with Seattle, especially as when the pads do come on. and see what he's able to do in training camp in a familiar system with a coach he knows well against professional football players. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I'm just curious to see what Seattle's going to try and do to fill that hole that Nick Bellore left as sort of a specialist, and I think Jack Westover could be that guy. That's maybe my hot take for the day.
Yeah, it's interesting because Bellore is not a guy that played very many snaps on offense, but from the sense that that roster spot could be there in this different style offense, maybe, just maybe, Jack Westover can find his way into this roster. Special teams going to be a big part of that as well. How has training camp been going so far for Westover, and what's it like having the starting veteran quarterback trying to pick your brain about the offense, because you know it as well as anybody on the team? Going to be discussing that and much more here with Jack Westover coming from the VMAC in our latest training camp interview. Take a listen.
So I got to talk to you at the Combine a little bit, obviously a little bit different setup there, so couldn't ask you a million questions like I wanted to, but give me one word to describe your journey to this point. Played a couple of games at Mount Si and then walk on, and now getting a chance here in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think grateful is definitely the biggest one. Just there's not a lot of people that have my background, my story. Not really playing high school football, to walking on and making it to here. So just grateful.
You look at what happened when you went to Washington as a walk-on, and you obviously were in a situation where you were trying to earn a long-term spot there, trying to get that scholarship offer. But when you first got to Washington, what was the biggest thing that jumped out to you? They say it's a rookie moment when you're in the NFL.
Yeah.
What was that rookie moment for you going to UW, being a walk-on?
Yeah.
I think kind of opened your eyes a little bit to what you were.
Yeah, I mean, growing up a Husky fan my whole life, I think, I grew up watching, Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin and all those guys, and, and to be in the locker room with them and to have them coming up to you as a freshman and creating conversation, that was kind of like whoa, okay, this is a little different.
So on the field, and you and I have talked about this before, but the blocking aspect, that's probably the biggest thing coming into college. Like, I only played a little bit of high school football, and now you got to try to block Division I defensive ends.
Yeah.
What was that process like, trying to go from somebody that mostly played basketball, didn't have much of that blocking background, other than a few drills that we did at Mount Si?
I mean, you definitely learn the hard way, when you're blocking Joe Tryon, who has 7-foot wingspan, then you're basically a basketball player at that point. I'm coming in and just learning the game, but you definitely learn the hard way, and it was I was able to go up against some really good defensive ends that wound up in the NFL. So.
What did you see as the biggest difference after those first couple of years in that regard, making yourself more of a complete tight end? Because you obviously had the hands from the basketball background, the catching ability, but to get on the field consistently in Ryan Grubb's offense, you better be able to block a little bit. So what was really the biggest difference there in the first couple of years?
I think just learning what works for me. I think, I knew, I'm not going to be able to block the same way as other tight ends because, I'm a little shorter, but I'm a little, not as long as them. But I think being able to utilize my speed, my quickness, my feet, beating guys off the ball, getting my feet in the ground quicker than other guys, that's something that I just had to understand had to be a strength of mine compared to the other way around. So.
You mentioned being awestruck a little bit by Myles Gaskin, some of the other players that you had rooted for in Washington that you now were teammates with. What's that experience been like here now coming to Seattle when you got a two-time Pro Bowl quarterback that you're now catching passes from? What's it been like getting to know Geno and Sam Howell, being a newcomer like you here, and having those guys pick your brains a little bit? Because Geno told me that you've been a guy that he's kind of been leaning on a little bit since you played in this offense before.
Yeah, I mean, I think the coolest thing I think for me is just being able to come in and have the respect of the vets as far as the playbook goes, the X's and O's wise, just having that respect. And then obviously having to go on in the field and earn a different type of respect as far as play style. And so it's been cool to be able to just have that conversation with them and have them, just be open to it.
And at the same time, you've also got two veteran tight ends that you can learn from as well. Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, two totally different play styles.
Yeah.
What's it been like so far being teammates with those guys, and lessons in this short period of time maybe that you've learned from those two?
No, I think biggest thing I would say is just, I noticed more at practice is just their intentionality with everything. Every rep is super intentional with those guys, and they're just, along with that, they're also just great guys. Just easy to talk to. So I think it just makes them easy to learn from and makes the transition pretty smooth.
What would it mean to you being a local kid? It's always a big factor here, but what would it mean for you coming from playing at Mount Si, playing at Washington, being undrafted? What would it mean to you to make this football team, to make the local team here with the Seahawks?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be, again, grateful comes to mind, just a culmination of a lot of, a lot of tough days and a lot of just a culmination of a pretty good story, I'll tell you that. So, yeah, grateful.
As always, you can follow me on X at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, we're going to have plenty of training camp news to break down. We got another practice coming up on Saturday. We'll dive into the key takeaways and maybe some after week one stock watch, looking at which players are off to a strong start and which players have more to gain as we head into the second week of training camp. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go Hawks.